Good evening, everyone. Welcome from Boston, Massachusetts, where the Mets and the Red Sox are battling it out, one for the ages. I'm Rob Resnick from the class of 1988. I have the privilege of serving as Alumni Association president and a member of the Board of Trustees.
Hello, everyone, and greetings from New York City. Rob, I won't comment on sports tonight. My name is Graham Campbell, the Alumni Association's Vice President for Alumni Giving and Chair of the Skidmore Fund, and a proud member of the class of 1998.
Graham and I are delighted to welcome you to our first ever Charter Day lecture. This is one of the ways that we recognize this important moment in our shared history. To give you a sense of its historical significance, Charter Day celebrates the anniversary of our establishment as a 4-year liberal arts institution back in 1922. In addition, it is a day that our community comes together to demonstrate that we believe in our college, the academic mission, and that creative thought matters.
We are so looking forward to tonight's program and all of the activity that will unfold over the next couple of days. Charter Day is an opportunity to be in touch with friends, families, and classmates, to make a gift in support of our students, and to state unequivocally that we as a community stand together for Skidmore and its future. There are multiple ways for you to get involved and to help 2025's Charter Day be our most successful ever. Just a few weeks ago, we kicked off the Charter Day season on campus and asked students, faculty, and staff on campus why they love Skidmore. I'll tell you some of what they shared. Faculty members who changed their lives, the kind, supportive, on and off campus community, their best friends, their availability to financial aid, and the squirrels on the case green. Just a few examples. Here's how we can make a difference today or now in the next few days. We can make a gift by going to Charter Day HQ, which is headquarters, and record a video that shares why you support Skidmore and our students. We can make a gift, whether it is your first contribution of the year or second or third gift. Please reach out to others to encourage them to join you. Hopefully they'll respond, and I know they will, for sure. We look forward to your involvement and support. With your help, we will set new records, celebrate our community, and provide resources for Skidmore's students.
Thanks for sharing the details of how to get involved, Graham. I think you win a Grammy for that. And I have my own video already up on the Charter Day HQ. It's a little corny, but please check it out, get a laugh, and more importantly, support what we're doing. Both Graham and I are delighted to be welcoming Associate Professor of Anthropology, Siobhan Hart, to speak with us this evening. Digging into Skidmore's archaeological past is especially topical at this time, when Skidmore is recognizing the signing of our charter more than 100 years ago and looking ahead to meet the current and future needs of our students. Professor Hart is chair of anthropology. Her work is concerned with using material culture, place, and community collaboration to examine inequities in the past and today. As an historical archaeologist, she is interested in what we know about the past, how we know it, and how it matters to people today. She is curator of the Skidmore Archaeological Collection and author of the book, Colonialism, Community, and Heritage in Native New England, 2019, University Press, Florida.
Without further delay, it is our great pleasure to welcome Professor Siobhan Hart. Professor Hart, the floor is yours. Enjoy.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here. I so appreciate the invitation to be here and to share some exciting research that's been taking place on campus over the last decade and a half. Wherever you are in the world, this image of Skidmore's new campus, distinguishing it from the original campus in downtown Saratoga Springs, may evoke memories and perhaps a sense of a home place. It was, after all, where you lived, worked, learned, formed friendships, community, and grew as a person, and perhaps appreciated those squirrels on Case Green. This land also connects us to people who came before us and those who will come after. The question that I was invited here to address is, what do we know about this land and the people who lived and worked here before us? So tonight I'll talk about what we know about the deep and more recent past, and how we know it through archaeology. And all of this work is based on collaborative work that I've done and my colleague Heather Hurst has done with students here at Skidmore College. So I'll start just by kind of locating myself in the discipline that I work in, historical archaeology. Historical archaeology offers a way for us to address these questions. As an anthropologist, I study people. As an archaeologist, I study people and in the past through material culture. And as a historical archaeologist, I use multiple sources of evidence, including written records and archaeological data, to examine the kind of large-scale processes of human life, modern human life, colonialism, imperialism, capitalism, racism. I also study those people who are left out of dominant histories. So where are the gaps and what can we learn about those people's lives and experiences? When telling the story about Skidmore's campus and telling the history of this land, it's important to first acknowledge that this is Indigenous land. It was and continues to be a gathering and healing place for Indigenous people, particularly Mohican, Mohawk, and Abenaki people, due to its proximity to the mineral springs. The Indigenous languages of these communities have words for the springs, names for the springs that translate to sparkling water in Mohawk, medicine waters in Abenaki, and the miraculous flow in Mohican. This map from Indigenous scholar Lisa Brooks' very important work on Indigenous homelands shows the location of our campus within the traditional homelands of Mohican and Mohawk peoples. So if you look on the map, you'll see a little yellow icon, and that's the location of Skidmore within Haudenosaunee. So Mohawk are one of the nations of the Haudenosaunee, and we're at the kind of nexus between Haudenosaunee and Mohawk and Mohican homelands. By homelands, we're not talking about places with fixed borders, but rather extensive networks of pathways, waterways, living sites, resource locations such as fishing sites, groves of nut trees, fields, grazing areas, wetlands, shellfish collecting places, and beaches. What Brooks and others ask us to do is to reframe how we think about land from an Indigenous perspective. Rather than thinking of land as something that belongs to people, from an Indigenous perspective, people belong to the land. So the Mohican refer to themselves as the people of the great ever-flowing waters, the tidal waters, the ever-moving waters of the Hudson River. The Mohawk refer to themselves as the people of the flint or the people of the crystal, referring to natural resources within their homelands, as well as being the keeper of the eastern door of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. There's a lot of information on this slide, and I show it to you for two reasons. One reason is to get us to think about time in different ways. Archaeologists use BP to refer to before present. Archaeologists like to think stratigraphically from top to bottom, right, in the way that we might excavate most recent to oldest. So we think about the present as being the point of reference for our chronologies. And from Indigenous perspectives, we can think about time in terms of generations, in terms of kinship relations, and in terms of cycles. The other point of this slide is to convey the significant time depth of Indigenous land use in the Northeast and particularly here in Saratoga Springs. This slide calls out some significant moments in the Indigenous history of this land, but really we have to be thinking on a time scale that is a millennia long time scale. So the earliest post-glacial material evidence of Indigenous peoples in the upper Hudson River Valley dates back to about 13,000 years ago. And that's approximately 520 generations. When we move, very rapidly, much closer to the present, and think about what's happening in the 17th century or 16 generations ago, we have Mohican and Mohawk peoples experiencing early settler colonialism, first the Dutch and then the English. In the 18th century, 12 generations, we have an increasing Euro-American incursion and the appropriation of indigenous lands. And then more recently in the 19th century, or 8 generations, we have the growth of wilderness and health tourism in Saratoga Springs, with Abenaki, Mohawk, and other indigenous people serving as guides and establishing seasonal encampments in Saratoga Springs, most notably in Congress Park, but also several other locations around Saratoga Springs, including Pine Grove, which is land adjacent to campus, to market goods to Euro-American tourists. So the significant time death of indigenous land use left a material marker on the landscape. There's direct evidence of pre-colonial native land use in this area, including this mortar that you see in the slide, which is located just north of campus's Northwoods, along a well-worn indigenous path that connects the springs of Saratoga to the foothills of the Adirondacks. This mortar would have been used with a pestle for grinding foods and medicines, and was probably used over centuries and likely over millennia. Abenaki elder Joe Bruchac, who's a Greenfield resident and who has close relationships with Skidmore College, remembers this mortar still having a pestle inside it when he was a child. The pestle that you see in the slide, the grinder, is not that original pestle, but is another one from Skidmore's archaeological collection. Other indications of native land use here include chipstone flakes and debitage, the remains of stone tool making and maintenance. We've recovered only a few examples of this from campus archaeology, but no doubt there is this stone signature of indigenous land use pretty evenly distributed across the landscape. One of the things that I always remind my students is the important kind of archaeological mantra that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but rather the absence of evidence may be the result of land use patterns. So less intensive land use may leave less of a significant material signature. It's also the product of differential preservation. So in the archaeological record, certain kinds of materials preserve better than others. So organic materials will decay and will typically not last for very long in the acidic soils of the Northeast, but things like stone or ceramics will last longer. And they're also the product of subsequent uses, land uses, and disturbances. So when you have building activities and other land uses that disturb the ground, you are also disturbing the material remains of past peoples. Skidmore Archaeological Collection, which is curated here in the anthropology department, has literally thousands of indigenous objects from elsewhere in Saratoga County. So not from right here on campus, but from other parts of the county, particularly from around Fish Creek and Saratoga Lake. There was a collector named Louis Follett who removed indigenous artifacts from sites along Fish Creek between the 1920 and 1970, and he donated this collection to Skidmore College in 1978. The sites that Follett collected dated to as early as 7,000 years ago, up through the colonial era. In the 1980s, Professor Emeritus Sue Bender returned with students to some of those same places and conducted archaeological testing. So we have materials from those sites from both the avocational collector, Louis Follett, as well as the controlled archaeological excavations that were conducted by Sue Bender and Skidmore students. Skidmore is currently working on compliance with a really important federal law called NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And this is a law that requires consultation with Native American groups that are related to the collections that museums and other institutions have in their possession about the care and use of those materials. So right now we're in the process of fulfilling our obligations under the law and establishing those consultative relationships with Native American tribes. The archaeology that's been conducted here on campus began in 2011 and was initiated by my colleague, Professor Heather Hurst. There have been two projects undertaken on campus. One is called the Woodlawn Estate Grotto Stables Project, which ran from about 2011 through 2020. And the second project is the Denton Home Site Project, which is our more recent investigations from 2021 to the present. The Grotto Stables location is in the map on the left-hand side of the slide. It's located just behind Wilson Chapel along the Spirit of Nature Trail into the North Woods. And if you look closely on the map, you'll see a little number 1 with a rectangle around it, and that's showing you the location of the Grotto Stables. The stables are actually oriented 90 degrees from where the map is showing you. So the long wall of the stables runs east-west and not north-south. But the trail through the Spirit of Nature Trail walks you right through the building. So if you are walking that trail and you look closely to the left and to the right, you will see some of the remains of the foundation of that building. On the right-hand part of the slide, you'll see the location of the Denton home site in relation to the core of campus. The Denton home site is located in the northwestern corner of the North Woods. So it is on the not connected to the North Woods trail network because it is north of the railroad tracks that separate the main part of campus from the northern section of the North Woods. The research that we've undertaken at these two sites has occurred primarily through a course that the anthropology department offers every fall called AN202R, Archaeological Field Methods. As part of our anthropology curriculum and part of the major, we have a requirement that students take at least one anthropological methods class. So they have a choice to take an ethnographic research methods course or the archaeological research methods course. And we've had a lot of interest and full classes in the last few years. Students are really excited about the opportunity to learn how to do hands-on original research in this place that is their home, where they get to learn about the history of their campus and share that with their friends and classmates. The research has also taken place through the Skidmore's faculty student summer research program. So in 2021 and 2023, I had the privilege of working with some exceptional Skidmore students doing archaeological testing at the Denton home site for the 5-week session that runs in June. For the sake of time, I'm going to focus primarily on what we're learning from our more recent investigations at the Denton home site. And here I have a kind of overview timeline just to give you some grounding, some temporal grounding. So first, people always ask me why it's called the Denton Home Site, and that's a great question. It's called the Denton Home Site because it's named after the first documented occupants of this land. In 1775, Revolutionary War veteran Preston Denton built what's been described as a, quote, log cabin in the wilderness in Greenfield, New York, to become the town's kind of, quote unquote, first settler. And I always encourage my students to, take with a grain of salt that designation of first settler, especially given, what I just finished talking about with respect to in the millennia-long indigenous land use in this area. Nonetheless, the Dentons settled and built a homestead on this land in 1775, and his family lived there for about 100 years. They had a farmstead there, and subsequently sold the land. His descendants sold the land to a person named Henry Hilton, who was a lawyer from New York City, who has his own complicated and sometimes problematic history. Hilton was a lawyer who worked for a very wealthy business person at the time, A.T. Stewart. A.T. Stewart left Hilton and Stewart's wife a significant estate, and Henry Hilton used that estate to purchase 1,500 acres that included the Denton parcels and land from a neighboring estate, the Walton lands, to create this 1,500 acre Woodlawn Park. Woodlawn Park was a massive estate that had over 40 structures. It had 25 miles of graveled roadways. It was bedecked in fine art and sculptures. There were 28 servants who lived on the estate. There were a number of animal species, horses, sheep, cow, dogs. Hilton was very interested in animal husbandry, so there was a lot of effort put into stables and other kennels and other places for animal care. And there were coachmen and blacksmiths and stable workers and folks who were supporting the household, who all lived here on this estate. We know a lot about Henry Hilton because he left a mark in the documentary record. So you can go and read the New York Times obituary. You can read about the scandals that he was involved in Saratoga Springs. But all of those other people who lived here and worked here are left unnamed and unrecognized in the historical record. Now, Hilton built this estate, which included these 3 buildings that I've highlighted for you. And this is a zoomed in version of the map that we saw in the previous slide. The Overlook Residence, the Shepherd's Cottage, and the Sheepfold. So if you can look closely on the map, you can see number 5 is the Overlook Residence. This was a 3-story mansion made of brick that Hilton had constructed, and it contained 20 different apartments, 3 bathrooms, had amenities like water, gas, hot air furnace, sewer service. And this was where Hilton housed many of the elite, wealthy visitors that he had to his estate. So folks that were coming from Boston and New York to spend time in Saratoga Springs on the estate at the invitation of Henry Hilton. The three buildings that are highlighted there, the Overlook Residence, you also have the Shepherd's Cottage, which is a smaller structure along one of those gravel roadways, and then the Sheepfold, which sits behind it, which was housing a large livestock herd. The Burley map from the 1880s also includes this. It's a really beautiful map. It includes the kind of plan view, like bird's eye perspective, and then it includes this perspective, which is more of a, from a kind of landscape point of view. And again, we see those three buildings. So you can see Overlook Mansion, number 5, the Shepherd's Cottage, number 6, and then the Sheepfold, number 7. So just keep those buildings and this perspective in your mind. If you look between number 6 and number 7, you'll also see a small little triangle there. That's actually a well. So you can see some of the topography on the landscape. There's a little bit of a hill, and at the top of that hill is a well. And that's something else to keep in the front of your mind. So we can look at these maps like this to get a sense of the landscape. We can also look to other documents from the time period. So there are postcards like the one you see here, which shows Judge Hilton's mansion in Woodlawn Park. The mansion was one of several large homes that were in the core of the estate, which was largely where the main part of campus is located today. So underneath the academic buildings, the library, the dining hall, you have the mansion, the wayside, which is off to the side. And something else to note in this postcard are some of the sculptures that appear. And some of these sculptures are now in prestigious museum collections, including the Met in New York City. I like this postcard because it not only gives us, again, a perspective on the buildings, the quote unquote cottages. So you have the Wayside Cottage on the right and the mansion on the left, but you also get a sense of it as a working farm. So you can see the herd of sheep here who are hard at work, keeping the grass down, and who were, part of Hilton's effort to experiment with animal breeding and selecting for particular traits. Hilton spent almost all of the Stewart money, all of the money that he inherited from A.T. Stewart, on this massive construction project. And when he died in 1899, he really had no funds left to give his descendants to care for the estate. So the property was foreclosed on, and it was auctioned off in 1916, purchased by 2 New York State congressmen who were really only interested in using it to extract natural resources. So there were large parts of the estate that were clear cut and logged, and none of the buildings were occupied and were used as residences. So in the 20s and 30s, the estate fell into ruin. It was looted. There were, materials were taken away, furnishings were removed, and it was largely abandoned, but used as a place for recreation by local people in the Saratoga Springs community. There were also a series of fires that destroyed some of the buildings in the 1940s and 50s, and we have newspaper accounts of those fires. In the 1960s, the land was purchased by J. Eric Johnson for $120,000 and donated to Skidmore in preparation for the relocation of the campus from the quote-unquote old campus to the new campus. And so in the core of the in the core of the campus, what remained of the Woodlawn Estate buildings were demolished in preparation to construct the new buildings for the library and for classrooms and for dormitories. And then in 1966, we had the first students move into dormitories here on the new campus. So as I said before, you can learn a lot about Henry Hilton and the elite visitors to Woodlawn Estate from newspapers and other sources from the time. But those who lived and worked here are not well known. And this is where archaeology comes in. Now, just from these photos, you can see that the landscape has changed significantly, right? In the Burley map, we saw, buildings that were surrounded, and in the postcards, we saw buildings that were surrounded by open lawns, well manicured, clear roadways, light posts, all sorts of things that were very visible. What was once cleared is now heavily vegetated. There are some visible features like the stone foundations of some of the larger buildings that you see here. So you see the stone foundation of the sheepfold on the left and the stone foundation of the Overlook Mansion on the right. We also can see the foundation of the, this is the Shepherd's Cottage. So doesn't have some of the same, very clear basement foundation stones, but had a dirt base, lower level, basement level. This was from 2024 when we were doing some testing inside of the foundation. And then there are some other maybe less obvious signs, less obvious to the untrained or unfamiliar eye. But when you walk in this part of the North Woods, which, there are no trails, so you're just sort of, finding your way around, you start to notice some things like this line of very large, very old maple trees. And these are actually trees that were from the Woodlawn era and were planted along some of those meandering gravel roadways that extended through the entire Woodlawn Park estate. So what are we doing? Well, we are doing archaeological work that is both high-tech and low-tech. We're using high-tech methods like metal detection and ground-penetrating radar, as well as GPS and GIS to do mapping. And then we're using low-tech and invasive methods, excavation, right? Scraping back soil with shovels and trowels to remove thin layers of soil and to screen that dirt through 1/4-inch mesh to recover any artifacts that might be there. These are kind of the typical methods of archaeology. The digging is what we're known for, but those high-tech methods allow us to really hone in on particular locations that might have cultural features or high concentrations of artifacts, and let us survey more and dig less. Another aspect of archaeological work that is maybe less visible in the popular portrayals of archaeology is the documentation. We spend a lot of time recording what we're finding. So archaeology is destructive, right? When we're digging, we are taking apart that kind of three-dimensional puzzle that's there. And so as we're doing that, we're recording what we're seeing and observing. We're recording it in scaled drawings. We're recording it in photographs and field notes and records that then accompany the artifacts that we find, because it's all of this that provides the context. And the artifact itself doesn't tell us much of anything without the context. Once we're finished in the field, and when we're working in the fall, we usually spend, we start in the end of August, and we go until it starts to get cold, and it does start to sometimes snow. We try to work at the site until the first or second week of November, and then we shift to lab work, and that's when we're doing the cleaning and stabilizing and cataloging, analyzing artifacts that we've recovered. So this is a map that's showing you a bird's eye view of all of the areas that we have tested so far. The big purple blocks are the architectural features that are still there, visible in one way or another. So the well, the shepherd's cottage, the overlook mansion, and the sheepfold. And then those little reddish squares are places where we've excavated. So those are our test units. And any of the lines are places where we've done either metal detection or ground penetrating radar. So you can see that we've covered, a number of different parts of the site, but we've actually not tested very much, right? We haven't moved very much dirt, but we've learned quite a bit. So one of the things that we've learned from doing our ground penetrating radar and then ground truthing it with excavation is that we've found things like the evidence of the 19th century roadways. So this is a radargram, which is just showing you where there are some kind of anomaly below the surface. And so we're looking for things like what's circled here in yellow to say, okay, well, that something there is different. What is it? And then we go in and we excavate. And what we found here is evidence of a buried gravel road. So this was when we were seeing whether, is GPR going to work at this site, is going to be effective. And we did find it to be effective here, as well as in this other location where, again, all of these kind of, squiggly black and white lines in the radargram indicated to us, okay, there's something different happening here. What is it? And then we put our shovels in the ground and found this buried brick wall. This is a brick wall that we think might be from the Denton occupation, based on some artifacts that were found at the very base of the wall. This wall is not visible at all from the surface. The top of it is 60 centimeters below the surface. But this bottle was found at the base of the wall, and we know from when the bottle was manufactured that it dates to, at least its manufacture dates to prior to Woodlawn Park. So it may be evidence of the later part of the Denton occupation of this land. This is just a summary slide of just some of the things that we've found that date to a variety of eras of occupation. So we have evidence of the Denton era, including that bottle that I just showed you. We have evidence of the Hilton era, those carriage roads, many of the ceramics, some of the other things that we've found. We also have evidence of this, what I call the undocumented period, where the land was really used for recreation and play, camping. The Dick Tracy cap gun in the lower left-hand corner is, mid 20th century, and was found at the site along with some other children's toys that are a sign of this, land use that is probably pre-Skidmore, but post-Hilton era. So, people continue to use the land and leave their material signature. And then, of course, there is, there's not much modern litter out there, but there's a little bit. And our archaeology leaves its own landscape signature. So that's there as well. One of the things I want to just mention, because it connects back to this, the point I was trying to make about historical archaeology being able to, tell stories about, people who are not recorded in dominant histories. is about this family, the McMullen family. So here you see two of the city directories from Saratoga Springs and entries for William McMullen, who was a shepherd at Woodlawn Park. Now, the 7,000 or so artifacts that we've found from the Denton home site, a good portion of them come from the area around the Shepherd's Cottage. And the Shepherd's Cottage is where William McMullen, his wife Blanche Newman Smith, and their daughter, Helen, who was a toddler at the time, lived for several years. Now, a good portion of the materials that we've found are architectural, so building materials, brick, mortar, thousands of nails, window glass, like what you see here in the slide. And most of that window glass is clear window glass, but a small percentage of it is stained glass. So you can see the variety of colors here in this slide. And that was really interesting to us. We noticed that there was a pattern to where we were finding it. We weren't finding stained glass everywhere across the site. We were only finding it off of the west side of the building. And so it seems like this was Hilton's intent to kind of, show off his wealth and style. On the side of the Shepherd's Cottage that was facing the roadway and the Overlook Mansion. The other side of the Shepherd's Cottage, the eastern side, we found mainly utilitarian kind of, household goods that belonged to the McMullen family. So things like pottery sherds, ceramics, right? Different patterns that were common patterns at the time, but were actually, were likely purchased a few decades before. So maybe here we have an indication of, a family that had means enough to have, fancier plates, but these weren't brand new. These were things that had been curated, maybe passed down in the family over a generation or so. We have personal items, so things that belonged to individuals. I really love clothing, and finding things like these shell buttons, this pair of shell buttons that were things that were part of people's everyday clothing, or the smoking pipes, these white clay smoking pipes, which we can connect to their source, right? The smoking pipe on the bottom here has a maker's mark, a stamp on it that tells us that this was a smoking pipe that was made in Glasgow, Scotland, and we know the period, 1805 to 1891. So we have, this connection of this family to these much larger, really global transatlantic markets. Things like glassware, and in particular, glass related to health and bodily care. So this is just one example, a bottle that student Abby Cantor found and was able to reconstruct a few pieces from the same bottle, and she was able to find in images and in Sears Roebuck catalogs from the time, a pretty close match to what she thinks this bottle was holding. She believes that it was Warner's Safe Kidney and Liver Cure, which was, read the description, used to treat a variety of conditions, including things like jaundice and kidney disease and, quote unquote, female weakness and convulsions and a variety of other bodily ailments. And then we have things like food, the remains of meals, right? What people were eating. It's probably no surprise that at this farm we have evidence of butchered animal bones and primarily domesticated species like pig, sheep, cow, no wild species here. But we also have, and you can see they're clearly butchered, right? These are bones that have been, cut quite intentionally. But we also have shellfish and, a great deal of clamshells. And, you can imagine there aren't too many clams coming from the Hudson River, right? These clams are coming from the coast. And they're coming from the coast to Saratoga Springs through these, local markets. So we can see some of the choices that the McMullins are making and start to reconstruct some of their, maybe day-to-day patterns, right? Where are they doing their shopping? Where are they buying the things that they're consuming? So from this evidence, we're beginning to be able to tell the stories of the McMullins and others who lived here and worked here before us, the choices that they're making in their day-to-day lives, as well as some of the constraints in their day-to-day lives. So despite the newness of our campus, the land here contains the layers and stories of people who came before us. There are places on campus where this past is visible, and places like those that I've talked about here today where that past is being uncovered. Two places that you may or may not know about on campus where that past is visible include the Skidmore Honor Post, which is located in a grassy area between the Perimeter Road and the Wellness Center. It was one of 4 gate posts at the 3rd Street entrance to Woodlawn Park. Through community effort, it was preserved and moved when the new campus was constructed. President Palamountain felt that the honor post would serve as a physical link between Skidmore and the people who came before us. And even before that new campus was established, Skidmore students were here at Woodlawn Park having bonfires among the ruins of Woodlawn Park. Today, students have similar social gatherings at the ruins of the Grotto Stables, using foundation stones like the ones that you see here in this photo on the right, using those foundation stones of the Grotto Stables to create a fire pit where they socialize. So the land here is what holds these stories, and we have an obligation to the people who came before us to recognize and tell those stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Hart, for those interesting and informative remarks of the past all the way up through now. It's amazing. In advance of tonight's program, alumni, parents, family members, and friends were invited to submit questions. And we'd also like to invite participants who are with us now to submit questions via the Ask a Question button from the event viewing page. We would love to hear from you. And Rob and I will try to ask Professor Hart as many questions as we can in the time that remains, and we will obviously allow her to respond. If you think of any additional questions following the program, please send them to alumni@skidmore.edu. And I think the first question, Rob.
Professor Hart, that was fascinating. Thank you so much. The first question is really it's sort of a general question about the challenges of your work. The question is, what are the challenges of campus archaeology in general? What has been the most difficult area to research on Skidmore's campus?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that's a significant challenge are just the logistics of it. I mean, any archaeological project has a lot of logistics, and doing archaeology within the registrar-defined class period is challenging. So one of the things that we've had to do is, rather than meeting for an hour and 20 minutes 2 times a week, we meet for 3-hour sessions 2 times a week. So, that allows us to get to the site, to be able to, get kind of stuck in on the work, and then to, gives us the time to do all of the processing that we have to do after the fact. Archaeology is hard work. It's really, can be really fun and engaging work, but it's hard work, and it takes students out of their comfort zone. So, some students are ready for that and are kind of hungry for that. And then for other students, it's a real challenge to, be out in the woods and to deal with the elements and to work in teams and to, navigate that. archaeology is also slow and really unpredictable. So, it's a science, but I don't have, there are things that I might expect or predict about what we might find, but until, you put shovel to ground, you really don't know. And so as an instructor, that can be challenging because it's all of that responding in the moment to, what you're finding. So yeah, I think those are the things that are really challenging. In terms of the difficulty of working on campus, working at the Denton home site has been challenging because it's not connected to, it's part of campus, but it's not directly connected, right? So I actually have to load students in a van, have a second student driving another van, and we have to drive out the Clinton Street entrance and go up Clinton Street and, park on the side of the road and hike, do a short hike, but a little hike in. So that accessibility of the location is a challenge. We didn't have that same challenge when we were working at the Grotto Stables because it was right there behind Wilson Chapel, so much easier to get to.
Next question. We've been asked, and I may stumble on this, but which Indigenous group is being consulted? Akwesasne Mohawks, Kanawake Mohawks? I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So for our NAGPRA consultation, yes, we're engaging with the Mohawk communities of both Akwesasne and Kanawake, and then also the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican for the collections that are from Saratoga County. Yeah, and that's work that's, we're in the early stages of that work.
Very cool.
Professor Hart, here's an interesting question. What are the most important skills that students learn from the excavation of historical objects?
That's a great question. The most important, so I think one skill is the really close looking, right? That kind of the observation that takes a lot of time, right? To be able to see something close up, to get so familiar with an object that, when you're doing the research to map, we find a lot of things that, you'd think historical archaeology must be easier because the material culture is more similar to things that we use today. Like in the 19th century, there's so much metal, things that I have no idea what they are. And it's the students figure out what they are because they're looking at those things so closely, right? They're making observations about, how something was, what is it made of? How was it made? What are the things that are that distinguish it from other things like it, right? And I think that close looking is something that, and the spending time with a single thing is something that, it's a really important skill. That kind of deliberative, directed, research is a skill that many students report back to me that they take into other classes and that they take into their careers beyond Skidmore.
To continue on that, where does this type of work go in the future, and when are the digs ongoing?
Yeah, so the excavations at the Denton home site are continuing, and this fall I'm on sabbatical in the fall. So Professor Heather Hurst is going to be teaching the archaeological research class. So the work will continue into the future. I think kind of big picture. So in my dream world, what are the things that I would like to see come out of this work? I think there's really room for the kind of, broader interdisciplinary work that Skidmore faculty and students are really great at, and an opportunity to have that focused on the North Woods. We can look at the North Woods in terms of its geological history and significance, its historical significance, its archaeological, its environmental, right? And I think that there's room to kind of bring those things together and to get get us all talking in the same, the same rooms, right? And then to create some public facing products around that, because this is knowledge that, it shouldn't just be anthropology students who know this. It shouldn't just be environmental studies students who, know about the fungi communities in the North Woods. It should be something that, it's important to our sense of place, our collective community sense of place. So I would love to see some public facing products come out of this.
Interesting. I've been waiting for somebody to ask about Indiana Jones, but here's also an excellent question. And that is, when did the archaeological study of the grounds of the new campus begin? Was it when we had the original development of the campus, maybe more recently? And if it was earlier, did we lose anything by some of the previous developments?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I believe that the archaeological study really began in the 2011. I don't know of any archaeological work that, I shouldn't say that. There was a collection that was in the library's special collections that came from the Grotto stables from, I think, a faculty member who was at Skidmore for a very short period of time in the 1980s and did some survey there, but we don't have the records from that. We have the artifacts, but have not been able to locate the records. So I think there was maybe some initial work in the 80s, and then more intensively beginning in 2011. What was I think what was lost in the original development of the campus is probably a lot. In the 1960s, that's when we were just starting to get federal and state laws around historical preservation and cultural resources, and those laws don't apply to private land. So, I think that institutions of higher education, could be better stewards of their own cultural resources. And I think that's what we saw with Joseph Powell Mountain, recognizing the significance of the honor post. And I think we can all probably do better in that.
So I've been told we're coming up on our last question, and there's so many good questions still coming in. Perhaps we can send them directly to you, Professor Hart.
Sure.
We will arrange that in the background. And I know I'm told it's the last question, but I am going to stick in too. You mentioned a beautiful bird's eye view map, which I saw on your screen. Is that something we can find somewhere? That might be a quick one.
Just depends.
It was the late 1800s.
Early map. Yes, there's a wonderful link through Scribner Library. If you go to the anthropology research area, you'll see a link for Woodlawn Park. So the wonderful librarians at Scribner Library have created an area where the students in my class can easily go to find those resources. Yeah, and that Burley map is one of the links there. Yeah.
Very cool.
And you can spend a lot of time with it, zoom in, out. It's a lot of fun.
Excellent. And then the last question, at least for this period, and we'll hopefully organize the remaining questions and get them off to you. What is the most interesting artifact you have found? Is the last question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so it changes, every time I revisit the material, I come up with something different. I think one of the things that really struck me, I said before, I'm interested in clothing and grooming and kind of personal care. So maybe 3 years ago, we found several late 19th century kind of metal hair curlers. So they were and we were able to see that they were some of the earliest curlers where you could set your hair, leave it in place overnight, and then get up and have beautifully curled wavy hair. And I just it just struck me as it's such a personal item. It's something that you wear, but it's very private and personal. And yet here it was in and amongst all of this other debris from a number of households from the 19th century.
Yeah, that Dick Tracy gun was something too.
Yes. You should have heard the students when they found it.
Well, again, I can't believe we have to wrap it up, but we are so appreciative of your time, Professor Hart, and pleased that for all the folks that were able to join us to hear on this topic and to respond with questions and comments from our community. On behalf of all of us participating, I'd like to thank you for joining us, for all you do to support our students, and to wish everyone the best as we conclude another academic year on campus. Rob, I'll pass it to you for a couple words.
All right. Graham, I thank you and join you in thanking Professor Hart for today's lecture. I'd also like to thank everybody who attended this evening for your participation and for your engagement with our college. I will also thank you in advance for your participation in Charter Day, both today and its official start on Thursday at midnight. Please be sure to access www.skidmore.edu/charterday, which is the link to the Charter Day headquarters, and be part of this amazing annual effort. Thank you.
What an incredible way to bring us from the past to now, and that's May 22nd, Charter Day. So thank you so much again, Professor Hart, and thank you everyone for being with us tonight. Every student and faculty member on campus benefits from your collective support and involvement. Happy Charter Day, and have a great evening. Take care, everyone.